Just have a seat. Good afternoon. Today, on behalf of the Albacete Forum, we have invited three of Lorenzo's friends to share with us not only their friendship with Lorenzo, and then therefore to invite you into that friendship, but to share with us a glimpse into a man whose personality and genius many of us know, and those of you who don't, you have to find out. To my left is Cardinal Seán O'Malley, the Archbishop of Boston, who has known Lorenzo as long as Lorenzo has known anything, really. Jakub Grygiel, who met Lorenzo as a young kid when his father was a professor at the John Paul II Institute in Rome, and Lorenzo would go to lecture, and Jakub will tell you that he became his driver. And Father Ryan Mann, who never knew Lorenzo in life, but who, like many of you, met him through YouTube, New York Encounter talks, and a variety of moments in which not only the profound and interesting, but the hilarity ensued. Father Ryan is a priest in the Archdiocese of Cleveland. Diocese. Just Cleveland. Just Cleveland. And Jakub is a professor of political science at Catholic University of America. Please welcome them with me.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great joy to be with you today and to talk about Father Lorenzo. There used to be a column in the Reader's Digest magazine every month that was the most unforgettable person I ever met. I'm sure that Lorenzo was a candidate for that category in many people's lives, and certainly in my own. It was my privilege to get to meet Lorenzo. About 55 years ago, I was a young Capuchin friar, studying at Catholic University, living at the Capuchin Monastery in Harewood Road. And in those days, Lorenzo was working in NASA or doing all of his scientific things. It was before he went to the seminary. It was my joy to be able to see him enter the seminary, to preach at his first Mass, and later to preach at his funeral Mass. For me, Lorenzo is one of the most extraordinary priests that I have ever met. He really is the poster boy for the joy of the gospel. Today, the title chosen for this conference is Still Awake, which I think is a very fitting title. I see the nuncio is here, who was in Cuba when I always said that being an apostolic administrator of the seminaries in Cuba was an Alice in Wonderland type of experience. The day that I arrived, the rector of the seminary said, "Oh, Bishop, we just discovered that one of the seminarians was an infiltrator from the police." I said, "What?" He said, "Oh, yes." He said, "And you know, we're so shocked because he was so pious, so studious, and punctual." I said, "Well, that should have given it away." But in those days when I was staying at the nunciature for most of the times when I would go for the visitations, and the one time that I was there, the nuncio said, "Well, just a week or so ago, Fidel Castro came at 2 o'clock in the morning, rang the bell, and asked to speak with the nuns." And so they woke the nuns up, the nuns went up, and Fidel said to them, "Sisters, I want you to prepare me a meal. I know you won't poison me. Well, like Fidel Castro, Lorenzo would often waking me up in the middle of the night, but precisely to poison me. He would take me to these fast food emporiums. I remember once going to the IHOP, and we got there at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and Lorenzo knew everybody, and he's introducing me to all these people. And one of them was the waitress who presented herself. She said, "I am a volunteer waitress at the IHOP for the night shift because I'm hoping to be discovered by a talent scout from Hollywood." Lorenzo would always know these most interesting people. But he was still awake at any time of day or night. As he used to say, "La noche está en pañales." The night is in diapers, you know. We spoke frequently late at night. We would read the same books, particularly Latin American literature, Vargas Llosa, Garcia Marquez, Isabel Allende. And often we lift out certain words and purple patches from those works and then comment about them. But with Lorenzo, you knew that you could call him any time, and he would call you at any time. Erasmus describes Thomas More as being born for friendship. And that's a good description of Lorenzo Albacete. He was born for friendship. As the Spanish say, he had don de gente. He had the gift of people. And he knew everybody. Recently, I shared with my priests in Boston what happened to me my first Holy Week as a priest. Of course, when you're in the seminary and you're looking forward to this Holy Week and you imagine what it's going to be like, well, I never imagined it was going to be like the way that it was. I was working with the Hispanic people at St. Matthew's Cathedral in Washington, and in those days they had the 3 ore, the 3 hours, and from 12 to noon in English, and then after that we had the Spanish services. But I was expected to be there early to help give out communion, and when I got there, I found the cathedral in pitched battle. There were 2 groups. There was the Washington Lay Association and another group called the Sons of Thunder. And they were in red berets with rosaries around their neck. And they were passing out flyers. The fist fights broke out. There was a woman standing in the back of the church saying, "O'Boyle, Cardinal O'Boyle, get out here like a man and face us." And then the Sons of Thunder picked up the head of the Lay Association and started running down the aisle of St. Matthew's Cathedral, holding him aloft. And I thought, if they get to the steps, they'll kill him. They'll throw him. Well, Monsignor Kuhn got there and stopped them. But as the people were leaving the church, rushing out, screaming, yelling, the television cameras were in front. And there was this elderly lady in her mantilla, in her little prayer book, trying to put it over the lens of the camera so nobody could see how badly Catholics behaved on the most holy day of the year. Well, the only reason I bring this up is because Lorenzo was dear friends with people in the Lay Association and with the Sons of Thunder. I mean, he was incredible. Pope Francis now is talking so much about synodality. I wish that Lorenzo were alive today because he could embody that kind of synodality. He could speak to everyone. And he was also the most non-threatening person that you could imagine. I always say that so many of the rough patches that we experienced after the Second Vatican Council and the implementation, which at the time was so difficult and resulted in scenes like my first year as a priest in Holy Week, synodality could have been a wonderful way to implement the teachings of the gospel. Lorenzo was a man who knew how to listen, and he was a man who never judged people. I remember reading an article about the Chancellor of Germany when he was elected, Olaf Scholz. He said, "Wir sind nie beleidigt, nie hysterisch." We are never offended and we are never hysterical. That's a good description of Lorenzo. He was never offended by anybody, and he was never hysterical. He was always listening. He was always looking for the truth and looking for it with love. I remember once when Lorenzo was installed as the president of Catholic University of Puerto Rico. Now, like many geniuses, Lorenzo's brilliance did not translate into instant success. In fact, there were some huge disappointments, as I always say. His meteoric presidency of the Pontifical Catholic University of Puerto Rico, which didn't even last a year. But I was next to him on the stage when he was installed as president of the Pontifical University, and I'll never forget it because Lorenzo was a large person, and he was wearing the academic robes of the Catholic University, which is dedicated to Our Lady, so they were sort of powder blue with these deep blue stripes on the sleeves and a black velvet bonnet with a gold tassel, and he's holding a wand in his hand. And he turned to me and he said, "You know, Sean, if this doesn't work out, I can always get a job working with Walter Mercado." Walter Mercado was an Hispanic psychic who had extravagant taste in wigs, jewelry, makeup. He would make Liberace seem tame. Losing his teaching position at St. Joseph's in Dunwoody, and also his very meteoric career at the New York Times magazine, caused me to worry a lot about Lorenzo. His life seemed to be at every turn he was being frustrated. But I always say God had other plans for him. Cardinal Scola arranged for a meeting with Don Giussoni, and that was a match made in heaven. Having been one of the early members of Lorenzo's mystical party that he defined as Friends of Jesus, I was surprised how quickly and completely Lorenzo flourished in communion and liberation. Lorenzo was brilliant. He was an intellectual, but he was not a theoretician. He was a man of a deep faith, a strong vision of faith, a vision of faith that was tested by pain and by loss. His beautiful work, if you haven't read it, The Cry of the Heart, will get you a glimpse into how much he understood the cross. In his own life, he was tested, and that led him to deeply appreciate the Paschal mystery. Like the rich young man in the gospel, he had the right questions, and he asked the right person. But in the gospel, the rich young man goes away sad. He was too challenged by the responses. In Mark's gospel, Mark said Jesus looked at the young man with love. I always say if that young man had known how much the Lord loved him, it would have freed him. He would have been able to give away all of his riches, and he would have followed the Lord. Well, Lorenzo was that kind of a rich young man. He knew how beloved he was. And in his life, that was a liberating experience. The communion of the church, his family, the mystical party, CL, were all things that were his passion. It helped to form Lorenzo, and for all those who have come to know him and love him, and we are all sure that Lorenzo is still awake. God bless you.
Thank you, Your Eminence. Jakub.
Thank you. Well, what you get now, between a cardinal, His Eminence, and Father Ryan, who turns out is trained as an improv comedian, you get me, a professor of international relations, like here's my lecture. Don't put a question mark on the title, still awake after I speak. I wasn't trying to be funny. 2 points I want to offer to you. The first one is Father Lorenzo, as His Eminence said, was really a man with an infinite desire for and ability for friendship and love. I wouldn't be here, physically even here, had not it been for him. I really came to the U.S. to a certain degree because of him. I've known him since I was a teenager in Rome. On my first trip to the U.S., he found me my first job, which I assume there's a statute of limitations. It was probably illegal. He's from Puerto Rico, no offense, but he found me a job. Where do you think the job was? A pen store, a fountain pen. He was a fanatic of fountain pens. So he found me a job. I did not speak a word of English, and I was selling fountain pens in downtown D.C. I've seen priests and people kneel in front of the altar in church. I've never seen a priest kneel at the entry of a fountain pen store. Here's a teenager that grew up in the shadow of the Vatican and works illegally in a fountain pen, and there's a priest that kneels there. He helped me with my college applications, and I'm going through that with my kids. He picked me up at then National Airport, Reagan Airport now, when I came for my freshman year, and he actually moved me into my freshman dorm at Georgetown. Before you say it's cute, he walked up to the 7th floor, and of those people that are at Georgetown, Harbin Hall, walked up, and he was not exactly the fittest guy on this planet, swearing very colorfully and saying, that he was, after all, a priest, and he should not pretend to have kids in college. You can imagine parents, they're already nervous, kind of wondering, what is this place? He, last stupid story, I didn't have a pillow cover, and he gave me one of his used pillow covers with a cigarette burn on it, which said, it said something like U.S. Olympic Sleep Team. So again, it doesn't match the title. I think my wife threw it away, unfortunately, because it's like a relic. But, most seriously, I'm actually, a husband. I'm a married man because of him. He celebrated our wedding. He blessed my marriage. And, think of your Father Lorenzo. What do you do during the vows, right? He tells me the vows. I repeat. I said, I, Jakub, take you as my lawful wedded wife. At a certain point, he stops. He says, stop looking at me. He said, look at your wife. He says, this was before all the stories on the front page. He says, I get nervous when men look at me professing their marriage vows. So we redid the vows and started again. Of course, my voice started trembling at that point. How often do you see an interruption, a dramatic interruption of marriage vows? It's not your daily marriage. But that was him. But seriously, let me actually share a couple of paragraphs from actually his homily at our wedding mass. Don't worry, not the whole thing, just a few paragraphs, bear with me. The love that unites a man and a woman in marriage is the sign of a great mystery. This mystery is engraved in the very structure of our humanity. It is experienced as an unquenchable desire of the human heart. It is a desire that aims at eternity. Indeed, the very word desire has in its Latin root a reference to the stars. Think of what is called the sidereal space or desiderio. The stars are the symbols of infinity. Love always aims at infinity, at a limitless forever. Love is a desire that reveals the human being to be made for infinity, capable of the eternal. This capacity, engraved in our humanity, in our flesh, as weak, as limited, as mortal as it is a sign of the mystery searched by all religious traditions, uniting all of us together regardless of all differences. Love is the sign and expression of the capacity, the need for God. And then he addressed me and my wife, but specifically me. He says, therefore, Jakub, you must recognize your love for Priya, my wife, as a path and vocation to be for her a sign of Christ's love. You come to this vocation gifted with the incomparable example of your parents, the prophetic history of your people, and the experience of having grown up so close to the men to whom the faith and unity of the church has been entrusted. Long story, I won't recount it now. Above all, you come to it with the grace of your baptism, constantly sustained and nourished by the Eucharistic offering of your love for her, just as you have done today. May your wife and children discover in your love, as husband and father, a sign of the grace through which Christ reaches out to them. Then he addressed my wife. I won't read that for you, just so you know that my wife somehow got L'Éternel, actually in French, and then mention of Edith Piaf and Elvis Presley. I didn't get that, but she got, a more fun part. But the point is, I think, that I want to convey here, is that there was really nothing more real and simpler for him, and at the same time full of mystery, as an example of mystery, than love and friendship. He really, as Your Eminence have said, he lived for love and friendship. He truly enjoyed it and called all of us to do the same. Everything else for him was really secondary, including, in many ways, his health, taking us at 2 a.m. to the fried chicken place while smoking cigarettes, so we probably got it too. But love and friendship was absolutely essential for him. But here's my second point, and I actually have a photo, if it can be put up to actually convey my second point. I don't know if the picture can come up. Yep, there it is.
Nice swim trunks.
Yeah, right, nice swim trunk, as Father said. Yeah, nice. What's the second point? Suffering. See, people are laughing. Suffering, hold on. Look at the words that even in his paragraphs I said, right? Mystery, infinity, l'éternel. He used to always say it in French. Actually, for those of you that, the youngster, we had answering machines in the dorms or apartments that we shared. He would often call me and leave a voicemail screaming l'éternel. You can imagine my roommates would come up, press play, and it's like, what's going on? There's some guy screaming l'éternel on the answering machine. Actually, in the back of the picture, there's, I can't remember if I wrote it or he wrote it. We wrote Vive l'éternel. So you have eternity, infinity, mystery there. But all of this for him was always linked with suffering. More than anyone else that I know, he really thought a lot about suffering. He lived it. By the way, he did not mention that in the wedding homily. And in so many ways and in so many conversations, he really repeated this idea, very simple, that it is human to suffer. In fact, in order to be human, you have to accept suffering. Some of it obviously is physical, he knew a lot of it, but most of it is not. And all of it always pointed as an answer to love. One of the greatest formative experiences that I had always with him was in the 90s. I was in DC, he was still in DC. I would see him almost every week, and we would meet, but before we did anything else, we had to go to the Little Sisters of the Poor, where his mother, Conchita, was there. And nothing else mattered. He had to put her to bed. She had Alzheimer's, so she often did not recognize him at all. But he had to be there to tuck her into bed, to say the evening prayers with her, and then sing a Spanish lullaby with her. Then you can go, however long that took, then you can go to the IHOP or fried chicken, etc. It was enormous love that often was a puzzle for many people because, whoever you are, even if you're your eminence, well, you had to wait for that. He was not going to sacrifice that expression of love to his wife for somebody else or for something else. That was primary for him. 3 thoughts on suffering, just to end with this, that I think are from him in many ways. First one is, and this is something I learned from my dad, but actually it was really hammered by Father Lorenzo. Suffering is the source of the great questions that make us human. As you recall, and he, I think, I'm sure mentioned it, probably wrote about it too, there's this great line from St. Augustine that after the death of one of his best friends, St. Augustine says St. Augustine became a great question to himself, the Magna Quaestio. Without suffering, and Father Lorenzo was quite open about that, without suffering, and perhaps even ignoring your own suffering, we really can't understand what is it that we are, who we are. We can't understand, we can't be fully human. It is a cry for infinity and eternity, as in that picture. You can't avoid it, and if you try to avoid it, you can't be human. Second quick thought, that, and he was quite colorful often about this, there are some really bad answers to suffering. I remember somebody died, somebody my age, at that point in the 90s, young, and the usual thing that people say after somebody dies, that you should find closure, you should find peace, etc. He would get mad. I don't know what the technical term is. He would actually say bullshit. And he said, you know what, I don't want to find closure. I don't want to find peace. I remember the line, he says, I want the person in carne e ossa, in flesh and bones. And I can't have that, right? So there's a suffering. You can't avoid it. It's there. And don't try to give me some answer to that. A third, which is related, the last thought. There's no solution to suffering. And again, I think it's related to that. He was pretty clear. There's no grand theory of suffering. A theory is an explanation of cause and effect. And you can give some cause and effect for some suffering. You fell, you banged your knee, I know what the cause is. But that doesn't solve the problem of suffering. What you do, he always says, you embrace the kid or the person that is crying because he banged his knee. You don't give him the theory of why that happened. And that's true for all types of suffering. No solution, no theory, therefore no solution to suffering. If you start thinking there's a solution to suffering, you want to get rid of suffering and perhaps of the person who suffers. Euthanasia, he would often say, is a solution to suffering. But that's not what we are supposed to do. That is not an end to suffering. That is just a modern theoretical solution to it, which is, I think, wrong. The only thing you can do to suffering, and again, he was pretty clear, and it goes back to my first point, you can love, you can suffer with the suffering person. You can just be with the person. And in that sense, I think he was a great man of friendship. So that's the picture. We're not suffering there, but we're together as friends. And for him, all of it was a big one package. Infinity, eternity, suffering, friendship, all together. You can't separate this. So I'll end on that.
Well, as was said, I'm Father Ryan Mann from Cleveland, not just Cleveland, but Cleveland, Ohio. Much like Nazareth, great things coming out of Cleveland. Maybe to build off what we just heard was, so for me, there's a break for all of you between those three and me. I never met him. So if some of you haven't met Albacete, I'm the same way. So you're probably thinking, well, what are you going to share about? You didn't meet the guy. So I was ordained in May of 2014, and then in October, Monsignor dies. It was after dinner one night. I had a great first assignment. It was 4 priests and Irish pastor who told great stories. So after dinner, I went up to my office and I was looking at some sort of Catholic blog or something like that, and it said, prominent Monsignor dies. And in my diocese, a previous bishop had stopped Monsignors, so I was like, there's still Monsignors? And then I thought, what's a prominent one? So I clicked, and sure enough, it was Albacete. And so that night began a very long journey of me reading blog after blog, commentary. I think there was a website called, is it God Spy? Is that something? I'm not in CL, sorry, I'm an imposter. There was a website, and he had a lot of articles there, and I'm just binging on all these things. And it was remarkable to me to binge on them because I'm not what you would say academic, so the idea of spending a night reading, most of my friends would not have assumed this. But what I found in reading was just something was resonating deep with me. And I had found someone who had thought more deeply about questions that I had held and never voiced. And I had found someone who was articulating things in a way that were life-giving, a way where I felt like I can express and speak the mystery. I could speak Jesus. I could speak the church into people's lives. That was a way that was a big yes to everything that was good in their lives. And it wasn't first, hey, if you do these things, maybe then we'll welcome you. It really resonated with me. And one of the things that stood out the most was his childlike way of candidness. He was so candid. Those of you who have little kids or are around them all the time, I have several families I'm close to, and the little ones always climb all over me when I'm at their house, and they like to draw their fingertips on the back of my balding head right here. And they say, "You're losing your hair." And I tell them they're grounded. But the point is, kids are very honest. They're straightforward. And so was Lorenzo. He had no problem speaking what everyone was feeling, but no one had the courage to say. One of the interviews was after 9/11. It seems apropos to tell this while we're in New York. He was being interviewed, I believe it was Nightline or something like this, and they were kind of pressuring him to say, okay, you're a Catholic Monsignor. What did you see when the towers were falling? What were you experiencing? And you could tell the unspoken question was, give us some sort of spiritual thing that we could all just say, oh, that is a good point. And he goes, I saw death, human death. I've seen death in many ways, but this one made me stop. I could not move past it. I saw death. And the interviewer, pressing in, trying to get some sort of moment of what you might call hope or consolation, said, well, does your faith help you? And he goes, no. And then he adds 1,000 times no. Now, when I read that, I was hooked. I said, finally. See, out of high school, I was a professional jazz musician, and after that I did Second City improv comedy. And then from there, just like all the other priests. And it was from there that I really experienced a lot of my calling. But my calling was not a denial of all the enjoyment I had in comedy clubs and all the fun I had in jazz clubs. There was no sense, and I wouldn't have had the consciousness or the articulation until years later, encountering his writings and his lived experience. I would not have had the ability to realize what Pope Benedict would say, that Christ takes nothing away that makes life beautiful, meaningful, and good. And so all the friendships I had in the jazz world, I'm not going to call Rome and say they were going to be canonized. They were jazz musicians. Everything you assume was happening with them, all right? But they were friends, and they cared about me, and we shared meals and stories, and I'm just old enough to say also CDs, all right? So we shared a lot of things together. And then in the comedy world, same thing. But I never felt like I had to deny any of that in order to follow Christ. When I began the tug to enter the seminary, it felt like almost like a natural progression of the beauty and goodness I had already experienced. Albacete wrestled with the same things, and thank God he did, because I would never have known that they could go together. In his early years, as the Cardinal said, he was into science. He was a physicist. And one day someone asked him, one of his science buddies, they said, how do you, a scientist, all right, 5 days a week believe in the laws of science, and then on Sunday you believe a man rose from the dead and you can talk to him and encounter him? Either you live 2 lives or you're crazy. And he said, coming from Puerto Rico, where even the coconuts are Catholic, I never confronted these questions. But he was obsessed. He was obsessed with this encounter in his life because he'll say years later, it was many ways those questions that led him to priesthood. Because it made him to confront, what do I believe? Do I have two lives? Are there two of me? How do I think this goes together so easily? And he'll wrestle with it. There's a great story of, I think it was Stations of the Cross or something in New York. And mind you, if you didn't know him and never met him, neither did I. You just stick around and people tell you stories and you'll hear them. All right? But they were getting ready for, I believe, a Stations of the Cross outside, and he's smoking a cigarette, which was his pre-spiritual practice. And smoking the cigarette, and a lady comes up to him and says, "Are you protesting things?" And he said, "Yes." And she said to him, she goes, "What are you protesting?" He said, "Dualism." And she walks away, and he's shouting at her, "It will get you, come back." But as you see with any great stand-up comedian, it's funny because it orbits around what's true. Things are funny because they have some connection to what's true. For him, he really meant, we are not separating our faith and our public witness and our life. And if you just walk away from this, it's going to get you. You'll be forced to live two different lives. And he had realized in a lecture that's not what he wanted to do. Seeing that witness led me to realize I didn't have to give up the ways that my humanity came alive through jazz and comedy, but rather it was actually meant in my own walk to be a part of the way I follow Christ, part of the way I preach, part of the way I prepare things. This then became even clearer for me during the pandemic. During the pandemic in the state of Ohio, we have our governor, Mike DeWine, and all the young adults had something at 5 o'clock every day called Wine with DeWine. And they would drink wine and watch Mike DeWine's update on the pandemic or what's going on. But in the corner, there was a lady who did sign language. And it struck me pretty early on that I don't know sign language. And it struck me, if you don't know sign language, it's pretty comical to watch because you have no idea what's happening. And yet, if you understood what was happening, you'd realize something was being conveyed. There's a message, there's a meaning, but you don't know the signs. I would find later on that same couple months in reading some Albacete things, he gave a talk about romance. And that what we've lost is the connection between romance and the signs of reality. That romance, as said just a minute ago, is meant to be a sign of the infinite. It conveys to us something more than the sign itself. It leads us somewhere. For the conference, if we understand the life is a bunch of signs, we wake up because now there's meaning. Now there's a destiny we're not yet at and we want more. We want to walk the road that leads to the fulfillment we're tasting. Thank God for Albacete. He showed us that in very comical ways. But I never got to meet the guy. But he's still at work. His writings and his friendships here continue to speak and awaken in me things that I'm really grateful for because I've realized there aren't two worlds. There's not two of me. There's just one. And as God said, it's very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Ryan, Jakub, and Your Eminence. We're left with a little bit of time, so this is like the best part because they all said that they like to answer questions off the fly. They also said that they can tell if the person was paying attention based on the questions that they ask, so we'll see if I was paying attention. But one of the things that strikes me about Lorenzo and about being still awake, right, is that here I am, this is the president of the Albacete Forum, right? 10 years after, we're almost at the 10th anniversary of his death, right, later this year. And we have 70 people who are committed to doing something to continue to introduce him to people. The director of that documentary is in the front row there, Father Ryan. It was a frontline documentary, by the way.
Sorry. Way to go. Good job.
But there's an incredible capacity in some people to stay awake for us, right? And I guess I would ask all of you, first, other than a nostalgic memory of a person, right? Like we tell great stories of our grandpa who passed away years ago, or war stories or something. Is there an aspect of Lorenzo that is still present, and how does that get lived? You know, when you're a child of someone, you know, you carry their name in a certain sense, right? So what does that mean for Lorenzo to still have the capacity to wake us up today? And it's to anyone who wants to try that.
Well, for those of us who were lucky enough to be able to enjoy his company and his conversation and experience his great love for people and for the church, he was really a man of the church, and he had such a wonderful way of taking the church's magisterium and making it alive and connecting it to people's lives. And it came out of a heart that was transformed by a life of faith and a desire to share the joy of the Gospels with others. And if anything, you know, as a priest, I think it's important for me to be reminded of that having received the gospel is a responsibility to share that joy with others. And so in many ways, Lorenzo's example and friendship is still touching my ministry, and I'm so grateful to you and the others in the Albacete Forum who are trying to pass that on to others as well. Thank you.
I think it was St. Paul VI who said something like, if the world won't listen to teachers anymore, but witnesses. And I think he was such a strong witness that every story you hear about him is captivating. And I think his enduring effect is, much like the Gospels themselves, puts flesh on it for us. It's not just a word. It's the Word made flesh. So he puts flesh on it, what that looks like, what that felt like, what that sounded like. And he just never believed in looking away from the world or your experience to find the Lord. And I found that to be incredibly captivating and healing. To that point about the 9/11 documentary, his point wasn't that Jesus isn't in the tragedy. It's that you don't need to look away. The light shines in the darkness. It doesn't get rid of it, the gospel says. It just says it shines in it. He's on a cross. He's in the suffering. And so it's more of an invitation to be open more and more, you know, the ephatha, he was a man who lived totally open. And that's both captivating and scary and hard and beautiful. And so I think because all of those things come together and you see it lived and you see the effect of living and all the friends here of him, I think it becomes a lasting imprint that makes you follow in the trail like of a boat and kind of tugs you along so that you can begin to look at it and practice those things in your own life and say, yeah, this really is a way to be human that is satisfying.
Thank you.
Just to add, I mean, he as has been said, he loved life in its entirety, with everything that came, and found joy in it. And that's why I think he was capable of, I actually remember him sitting at a kid's table pretending to have high tea with a bunch of toddlers while the adults were, talking at a table. I wasn't a toddler yet, but and for him it was it wasn't playful. It was the most natural thing to do, and have a semi-serious conversation with 6-year-olds, right? But that's life, and he was truly curious about it. Last thing I'll mention, something I learned from him. He often would speak and do this. Right? And I actually one day I was like, "What is this? I mean, it's like a nervous tick or what?" He said, "No, that's the serpent from the far side." And he said, "Well, it's the serpent from the far side before original sin. The serpent was not crawling, was standing up, according to him." I have no idea what else he drew out of that, but it kind of stuck with me. I used it actually in a class on international relations, which it was bad because nobody knew what the far side was. So it's a different generation. So it didn't pan out. But, you know, she was a great witness to the different things. As a teacher, though, you know, he might not show up in class, as I understand. So he was a great witness as a teacher, probably. He often didn't show up in class. This is a different story.
Thank you. In life, I shared a lot of things with Albacete, but the thing that I shared the most is a love for food and a girth that when he met me, he said, finally, someone has come to this movement who's fatter than me. There have been all of these skinny Italians, and now I feel more myself. And so I've always taken that as an intro and a great joy, but more than anything, I was with him as he was at the end of his life. And what I found is that it didn't matter who entered that hospital room, that he felt a great desire to convey to them love, joy. I remember when His Eminence came in at the end of his life, and Lorenzo was not there to be pitied, right? He was grateful and wanted to make people laugh even when he had a tube into his mouth and into his nose, because he had this great capacity to recognize that in the midst of suffering, there was a truth that was more beautiful, that was rooted in that same suffering. So I thank our speakers for sharing that, because for me, Lorenzo continues to keep us awake. On behalf of the New York Encounter, I'd like to thank the New York Encounter and you for allowing us to be here. As the Albacete Forum, we exist really as an attempt at keeping a spirit alive that for us was very much a real friend and continues to be offering that friendship to us and to new people all of the time. And you can visit us at thealbaceteforum.org to find out more information. On behalf of the New York Encounter, I thank you for your support, and I encourage you to continue your support of the New York Encounter. There will be opportunities to do so as you leave, and also online. Without your support, opportunities to have guests and to encounter people don't happen. So we thank you for your support of the New York Encounter, and we encourage you to give as generously as you can and to support this mission. Thank you very much. And to our speakers, thank you.